Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going in depth into my top 24 quarterback and tight end rankings for week number 4 of the 2022 fantasy football season. Inside of today's video, I will not include any of the quarterbacks or tight ends that already played on Thursday Night Football, the Dolphins and the Bengals, because they already played, and it's not like you can magically just now throw them into your lineup. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. And if you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at notorious FNTSY. I would also like to ask that if you guys have any questions about week number 4, to please make sure that you ask down below in the comment section. I love to talk to you guys down there. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 4 quarterback and tight end rankings. We begin with quarterbacks 1 through 8, headlined by Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills, going up against the Baltimore Ravens this week in Baltimore. Now, in the wide receiver rankings video that I released a little bit earlier today on Saturday, I talked about how I love this matchup for the Buffalo Bills. I really do believe this is going to be an incredibly high-scoring game, and I think that Josh Allen smashes in this game environment. Even last week up against the Miami Dolphins, where the Buffalo Bills as a team didn't even play all that well, Josh Allen still finished inside the top 5 at the quarterback position, finishing week 1 through 3 as quarterback 2, 4, and number 3. This week up against the Baltimore Ravens, I believe he finishes as the number 1 quarterback at the end of the week. Next up, we move to the other quarterback in this game, Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday. Now, Lamar Jackson is coming off of back-to-back weeks as the number 1 quarterback in fantasy football, and 2 weeks in a row with over 100 rushing yards. This guy is putting up a potential MVP season to start the season off, and here up against the Buffalo Bills, again, I believe this is going to be a high-scoring game. Now, on paper, the Buffalo Bills defense is definitely tough, but when you have an offense that's as skilled as the Baltimore Ravens, I really do believe that Lamar Jackson will be able to get it done in this game, even with a tougher matchup, so he is my quarterback number 2 on the week. At number 3, we got Jalen Hurts. Speaking of MVPs, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars at home in Philadelphia this week. Now, right now, it appears the 2 frontrunners to be the MVP in the NFL right now. Now, I understand, Nick, it's only week 4. That's okay, but we're talking about right now. We're talking about the present. It appears that most people believe it will either be Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson. Last week up against the Commanders in Washington, Jalen Hurts had 22 of 35 completions to attempts, 340 passing yards, 9 rushes for 20 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 28 fantasy points, and he was the quarterback number 2 at the end of the week. 3 performances in a row inside of the top 5. The Jacksonville Jaguars do look like a legit team, which will push the Philadelphia Eagles even further. I really do believe that in a matchup that the Jacksonville Jaguars may be able to keep themselves in, they'll be able to kind of stay around. That will encourage the Philadelphia Eagles to score more and more points, and I really like Jalen Hurts here in this spot. Again, I did talk very positively about Josh Allen, how I feel like he's going to be the number 1 guy, but you can easily make the argument that Lamar or Jalen Hurts could be the number 1 quarterback at the end of the week. At number 4, we have Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday Night Football. Now, the Frogman himself has finished inside the top 12 twice thus far this season. Week number 1, he was the quarterback number 1. Week 2, QB 13. And week number 3, up against the Indianapolis Colts, quarterback number 11. Now, last week for Patrick Mahomes, things didn't go the best as they lost to the Colts. And honestly, I wasn't uber impressed with his performance. 20 completions on 35 attempts, 262 passing yards, 4 rushes for 26 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 18 fantasy points, quarterback number 11. And this matchup up against the Buccaneers on paper looks extremely rough. It looks like this matchup is going to be very tough, but if there was ever a game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to get right, for them to have a better game, for Tom Brady to look better, it would be on Sunday night up against the Kansas City Chiefs, a game that is truly going to push that offense to be at its best, especially with Mike Evans back. I really think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to wake up a little bit. And I think Patrick Mahomes is incredibly safe every single week. Sure, he might not finish as the number one quarterback up against the Bucks, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't even surprise me just with how good Patrick Mahomes is. Now, at quarterback number 5, we have the short king himself, the king of Call of Duty, Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals, going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. His first 2 games of the year, he looked incredibly good. Last week up against the Rams, 37 completions on 58 attempts, the most attempts he's had this season. 314 passing yards, 2 rushes, 8 rushing yards. The problem, he didn't score a single fucking touchdown, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Quarterback 22 at the end of the week with 13 fantasy points. This week up against the Carolina Panthers is a very clear, a crystal clear bounce back spot for Kyler Murray. The Carolina Panthers defense has not looked good at all. Kyler Murray should be able to run and throw the ball all over that defense. The only qualms I have right now with this situation is the fact that Hollywood Brown is banged up. Now, again, I'm not a doctor. I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny fucking Sins. So when I say that I believe that Hollywood Brown is going to play, that doesn't mean that you should set in stone that Hollywood Brown is going to play. But I believe he's going to play. I think that helps out Kyler Murray a ton. But if he doesn't play, then I wouldn't be as confident in ranking Kyler Murray as high. At number 6, we have Justin Herbert, the pervert of the LA Chargers, going up against the Houston Texans in Houston. Now, it is very clear that that injury is impacting Justin Herbert. In week 2 up against the Kansas City Chiefs is when he suffered that injury, but in that game, he still played quite good, right? 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 334 passing yards, 24 fantasy points, quarterback 9. Last week up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, things kind of fell apart, right? He didn't have all that great of a game. 24 completions, 45 attempts, 297 passing yards, 1 rush for 7 yards, a touchdown, an interception, 14 fantasy points at quarterback number 21. Now, going into the game, we all thought the Jacksonville Jaguars were not the best team, right? They looked good to start the season, but you never know. That could have just been a fluke. Now they have a real test in the Chargers. Even with Justin Herbert banged up, this is still going to be an incredibly rough matchup. But this week, he gets the Houston Texans. And maybe the Jaguars were a little bit more legit than I gave them credit for, but I don't think the Houston Texans are too legit to quit. I really do believe that Justin Herbert, the pervert, even banged up, he's still going to dominate. So I really like Justin Herbert here up against the Houston Texans. It sucks that Keenan Allen still isn't healthy, but it is what it is. I still think Justin Herbert is just fine. Quarterback number 7, Mr. You Like That, Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings, going up against the New Orleans Saints in, not technically the game's at New Orleans, but it's in England. Now, I've talked about this a couple of times. We all know that Kirk Cousins sucks complete and utter fat cock when it comes to playing on prime time. Once the game gets to prime time, sleepy Kirk Cousins plays awful. We saw it up against the Eagles. 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. Things aren't the greatest for him. But when he's playing at 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, he's perfectly fine. Now, this game in England technically might be considered prime time, but it takes place in England at 4:25 or 4:30 their time. So I don't believe this should be considered a primetime game for Kirk Cousins. I think Kirk Cousins will be wide awake, and I think he has a great game here up against the Saints that are definitely depleted. Last week, after that bad performance in Philadelphia, Kirk Cousins did bounce back. 24 completions on 41 attempts for 260 passing yards, 1 rush for -1 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 18 fantasy points, and the quarterback 10 at the end of the week. Mr. You Like That, I think will be in for a pretty decent showing here in England. To close out the top 8, we got Russell Wilson, Mr. Unlimited, going up against the Las Vegas Raiders in Las Vegas. Russell Wilson went up against the 49ers last week and shit the bed. He hasn't really been all that good except for in week 1, and he was just okay because he finished as quarterback number 14. Now here, we are in need for a Mr. Unlimited comeback game, because if he doesn't bounce back here up against the Raiders, whose defense has been as soft as baby shit, then Russell Wilson is probably finished for me in terms of fantasy football. Now, he has some decent matchups coming. Indianapolis, the Chargers, the Jets, the Jaguars, but I am not going to be anywhere near as confident as I am right now talking about Russell Wilson if he shits the bed again. And I don't think you can reasonably rank him inside of the top 10 if he plays bad here up against the Raiders. Again, the Raiders are not looking hot. I think the Raiders offense is good enough to keep up with the Broncos. So I think the Broncos are going to potentially be in an incredibly high scoring game here. But again, if Russell Wilson shits the bed big time here, then I'm going to be incredibly worried about starting him going forward. Next up, we move to quarterbacks 9 through 16, beginning with Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions, going up against the Seattle Seahawks this week. Now, I had much higher praises for Jared Goff earlier on in the week, and that's not because I think Jared Goff magically just got worse as the week went on. It's because Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be out in this game. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is such a big safety valve for Jared Goff that it definitely is a humongous hit to this team that he is gone and not going to be able to play. But they still have Hawkinson. They still have DJ Chark, DJ Chark. They've got Khalif Raymond. They have these other players to throw the ball to. Obviously, none of them are on the same pedigree as a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown. But this matchup up against the Seattle Seahawks is mouth-watering. I really do like this matchup up against the Seattle Seahawks. Jared Goff has had quarterback 18 performance week 1, quarterback 8 in week 2, quarterback 18 in week number 3, and if the trend continues, he'll be quarterback 8 this week up against the Seattle Seahawks. I think he should be just fine here, and again, I do like this environment up against the Seahawks defense. Next up, we move to Tampa Bay Tom Brady of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up against the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. Now, if you drafted Tom Brady like I did, expecting top 10 performances every single week, then you have been kicked directly in the cock by Tom Brady, and he might have to give you a kiss like he would kiss his son, because things are not looking the best for Tom Brady right now. Quarterback 26 in week 1 up against the Cowboys, week 2 up against the Saints, QB 28 last week up against the Buccaneers, or not up against the Buccaneers because he's on the Buccaneers, up against the Green Bay Packers, quarterback number 19. But again, that was without Evans. That was with the whole team hurt. So things are looking to get a little bit better for Tom Brady. I think once Godwin returns and when they have Evans, all these guys firing at all cylinders, that's when Tom Brady is truly going to be back. I'm fine with him having shit the bed the first couple of times because I do not believe that this is the year where Tom Brady has this crazy big decline, right? I honestly don't think that Tom Brady would have came back to the National Football League and left his nagging wife if he believed that he was not going to be good, if he believed that he is somehow much worse than he was last year in 2021. Again, I don't know if this is necessarily the bounce back spot, but I feel like if you rank him outside of the top, for instance, 14, he might end up kicking you directly in the ass by having a huge game. Next up, we move to quarterback number 11, Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders, going up against the Broncos, quarterback 17 week 1, 11 week 2, and quarterback number 6 in week 3 up against the Les Titans. Like I said, the Las Vegas Raiders are currently 0-3. I think if you told anyone that going into the season, they would have thought you were crazy. They have had multiple games that they definitely could have won. They could have beat the Chargers. They definitely should have beaten the Cardinals. And they could have beat the Les Titans, the Tennessee Titans, last week. Again, I do like this matchup up against the Denver Broncos because neither of these teams really have these world-beating defenses, which means that this game could be high-scoring if both of the offenses are clicking on the right cylinders, and I think that could end up happening this week. We all expected these matchups in this division with the Raiders, the Broncos, the Chargers, the Chiefs, that these would all be incredibly high-scoring games. We haven't really seen that yet, but maybe it starts in week number 4. Quarterback 12, Mr. Aaron Rodgers, Mr. Discount Double Check. Start off the year on fire, but in a bad way, right? Like, he set your team on fucking fire, quarterback 32. Then week 2 up against the Bears, the team that he owns, finishes quarterback 17. Then quarterback 13 up against the Bucks in week number 3. Aaron Rodgers' weapons are finally starting to get healthy, and I think if Romeo Doubs continues to look this good, then Aaron Rodgers might end up finishing inside the top 10 at the quarterback position. This matchup up against the Patriots, I love. The issue is the fact that Axel Hoyer, aka Brian Hoyer, his real name's actually Axel, is the starting quarterback, and that means that this game probably won't have much pushback for the Packers, right? The Packers could just hit I almost said the New England Eagles, the Patriots from the back. How you like that? And then there's going to be no fire back because Brian Hoyer sucks ass. So that's my worry about Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he just takes a dookie on him early and gets out of there, but I don't really expect the biggest of game from Rodgers. At number 13, we have Matthew Stafford of the LA Rams going up against the 49ers on Monday Night Football. And I'm starting to get concerned with Matthew Stafford. He's only had one game inside of the top 10 this season, and that was up against the Falcons. Now, again, do I think that Matthew Stafford's downfall is coming? No. But in a matchup up against the 49ers, I don't really expect him to smash it, right? The 49ers defense is pretty solid, and Stafford hasn't looked the best. He has Cooper Kupp. He has all these weapons. So eventually, things are going to come back into form. I'm just not too sure. That big game comes up against a tough Niners defense. Number 14, we got Carson Wentz of the Washington Commanders going up against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I don't expect a big bounce back, right? Because he was a top 5 quarterback in weeks 1 and 2. Last week up against the Eagles, quarterback 30, 25 of 43 passing, 211 passing yards, 3 rushes, 22 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. A big game for Wentz because, well, not a big game actually that he had, but a big game probably in his mind because he was going up against the Eagles in a revenge game, and he does not live up to the expectations at all, especially since he looked so good the first 2 weeks, right? If he shit the bed against the Eagles and he was like quarterback 24 and 19 the first 2 weeks, no one would have even batted an eye. It's because Carson Wentz put a mirage. He put a bag over our head and made us think that he was back to being great, and maybe that's not the case here up against Dallas. This is a tougher matchup, but I just find it hard to rank him super deep in my rankings, especially since, again, Tua already played, Joe Burrow already played, so in reality, Carson Wentz is like quarterback 16 in my rankings. Obviously, Tua didn't pay off because he got hurt. It is what it is. I hope he's okay, obviously, and I think he will eventually be okay. He might miss maybe a month or so, but I think eventually he will play again. With that said, back into Carson Wentz, though. I think up against Dallas, he could finish as quarterback like 16, 14, somewhere in that range. So I'm definitely fine having him ranked here. At number 15, we have Marcus Mariota of the Atlanta Falcons going up against the Cleveland Browns. Back-to-back-to-back games inside of the top 20 at the quarterback position. QB 10, 18, and 15 in the last 3 weeks. Last week up against the Seattle Seahawks, I did like Marcus Mariota a decent amount. Now, his rushing numbers have declined ever since week 1. Week 1, 72 rushing yards. Week 2, 16, and then week 3, 4 rushing yards. But I don't think that necessarily means that Marcus Mariota has just lost all of his rushing power. It's more the fact that maybe the times he did go to rush the ball just didn't end up working, not necessarily poor decision making. Here up against the Cleveland Browns, I think this matchup could potentially be a sneaky high-scoring game. Now, I haven't said that about every game here, so I really do believe that could be the game for Marcus Mariota here, and he finishes as a solid quarterback. I don't really expect him to ever finish inside the top 5, but in a good game, could he be QB 10? Definitely. We saw that again in week 1 up against the Saints. To close out the top 16, we have Ryan Tannehill of the Les Titans going up against the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. Now, I started to kind of dog heavily on Ryan Tannehill after his performance in week 1 and week number 2 up against the Giants. You would have thought that the Tennessee Titans would lay them down and do sweet, sweet nothings with them, and they would absolutely fuck the shit out of the Giants, right? The Giants win that game. Then they get the Bills, and you're like, they're probably going to lose to the Bills, right? The Bills are the best team in the NFL, but they're going to keep it close, right? This is going to be a game where Ryan Tannehill wakes up, right? The Titans normally play close with these good teams because of the coaching, because Tannehill's pretty decent, and then Tannehill slaps you front hand, backhand like that Key and Peele sketch. Quarterback 32. Last week up against the Raiders, quarterback number 8. I think he's back to being a relatively safe quarterback. He has some rushing upside as well. Not a guy that I'm jamming into my lineup every week, especially up against the Colts, who I think's defense is much better than they've been playing the first couple weeks of the season. But again, Tannehill definitely deserves to be a start-worthy quarterback. Now, we move to quarterback 17 through 24 to close out the quarterback position before we move to the tight end, starting with touchdown Jesus himself, Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars going up against the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia, a revenge game for Doug Peterson. Back-to-back games inside of the top 12 for Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence, so I'm going to need to start putting some respect on this motherfucker's name because he has been amazing. He really has been. That dumbass motherfucker, Urban Meyer, made us all think that Trevor Lawrence might somehow end up to amass as a bust. Now, I was someone who saw straight clear that, right? Or straight through that, not clear that. I saw straight through that, and I realized, you know what? Urban Meyer's an idiot. Just take his rookie year with not just a grain of salt, like a Salt Bay level of salt where he just pours the salt on. Don't worry, don't panic. Trevor Lawrence will be just fine. And again, I didn't have him ranked as like a top 10 quarterback on the year. I don't think anyone did, but he has looked a lot better. I think quarterback 17 is a pretty safe ranking for him. If he was playing up against, for instance, next week, he gets the Houston Texans, he's going to be ranked much higher even if he has a poor performance this week because he has an incredibly tough matchup up against the Eagles defense. The Eagles haven't really had that tough of opponents, but they do look like on paper they have one of the better defenses, if not the best defense in the NFL. So again, I don't really expect a smash spot for Lawrence, but he should be decent enough to, if you're in a deeper league, you're not going to hate starting him. Number 18, we've got Jacoby Brissett of the Cleveland Browns going up against the Atlanta Falcons. Back-to-back games inside the top 18 at the quarterback position for Mr. Jacoby Brissett. This week up against the Atlanta Falcons. Again, on paper, this is a great matchup that could be sneaky high scoring. I think Jacoby Brissett isn't necessarily as good as he showed last week. Last week, Jacoby Brissett looked legitimately not elite, but he looked like one of the better quarterbacks in the league, right? His decision making was amazing, but then again, he was playing up against the Steelers. This week, he gets the Atlanta Falcons, which should be a pretty safe matchup as well. I just don't really see him finishing inside of the top 12. So quarterback 18 seems just about right for me. At number 19, we've got Geno Smith. Let Geno cook of the Seattle Seahawks going up against the Detroit Lions. But before we could break down Geno Smith further in depth, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends and our sponsor today's video over at Underdog Fantasy. They've been on your screen this entire time. Are your best ball teams already cooked? Well, head on over to Underdog Fantasy to resurrect them with their Week 6 through Week 17 best ball tournament. The entry fee is only $10 with $500,000 in total prizes and $100,000 going to first place. All you got to do is draft your team. That's it. You don't have to worry about waivers, trades, or in-season management because Underdog will automatically give you your best score at the end of each week of the season. Underdog also features daily and best ball contests for the MLB, NBA, PGA, and NHL so you can get action all year long. All you got to do is click on the link in the video description down below or use promo code Stokastic, Stokastic, to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100 with Underdog. Make sure you guys do go ahead and check them out. They also have contests on Sundays. You can play just Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, those drafts. It is incredibly fun. I love drafting over on Underdog Fantasy. So back on into Geno Smith. If Geno Smith was any other quarterback, I would really like this matchup. Again, Geno did look good up against Atlanta, 32 of 44 for 325 passing yards, 2 rushes for -1 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 INT, 20 fantasy points. But how many weeks do you really want to rely in a row on Geno Smith? Because even though he finished as quarterback 7 last week and looked good, would it surprise you if even in a good matchup up against the Lions, he finishes as QB 27? The answer should be no. Because it shouldn't. Because Geno Smith just isn't all that good. Not trying to dumpster on Geno Smith. I think he's an okay start this week. But after Geno Smith is where it gets to be really, really, really bad. Very bad. Extremely bad. Starting with the bad, Cooper Rush of the Dallas Cowboys going up against the Washington Commanders. Even on a good day, Cooper Rush doesn't look good. Quarterback 34, 20, and 23 through the first 3 games of the season. Obviously, week 1, I'm not going to say, oh, he was quarterback 34, he fucking sucks ass. He came back in for Dak Prescott, so I'm not worried about that. But again, even up against the Giants, whose defense looked uninspired. They looked like they didn't give a fuck to even be out there. And yet, Cooper Rush finishes as QB 23. Up against the Bengals, quarterback 20. Like, again, the Commanders' defense isn't that great. So sure, could Cooper Rush have a decent game? Of course. But is he ever going to crack the top 12 even in an easy matchup? Probably not. Like, he's worse than Geno. He's worse than Jacoby Brissett. So things just aren't the best for Mr. Cooper Rush. Speaking of isn't the best, Daniel Jones, who looks like he should be your accountant. If you ever look up a picture of what Daniel Jones looks like, I assume maybe you know what he looks like already. This guy looks like he's going to be doing your taxes in a couple of years or selling you a car a couple of years from now. Quarterback 16, 22, and 20. He has rushing upside 9 for 79. last week. That's about the only reason why you might ever want to start the guy. He has yet to eclipse over 200 yards on the season. Both of these teams, the Chicago Bears and the New York Football Giants, the team that he's playing up against, the Bears, both want to run the ball at an incredibly high clip. I expect this game to be over very quick. There's going to be a very run-heavy back-and-forth affair. The wide receiver core that the Giants are rolling out looks like a JV fucking football team. It is embarrassing how bad they are. Kenny Golladay is awful. Kadarius Toney might not even end up playing. Then they've got Sills. They have I'm Rick James, bitch, Ricky James. They don't really have anyone. It's a disaster for the Giants, but one of those teams is going to end up being 3-1, which is just crazy. 22, we got Baker Mayfield, who just got dragged through the mud by DJ Moore. DJ Moore basically implied that Baker Mayfield is so awful that maybe he would rather have Sam Darnold be the starting quarterback of the team. And you know, if someone is calling for Sam Darnold to be the starting quarterback, that the other quarterback is absolute dick cheese. This week up against the Arizona Cardinals, we could see a higher scoring game, but again, I don't really want to be relying on Baker Mayfield. Quarterback 23, Matty Ice Baby. Dun 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 dun. Quarterback 19, 31, and 16 over the last 3 weeks, going up against the Les Titans this week. I think Matt Ryan is just a decent guy that you could play every week in a pinch. You're never really expecting that big performance, even with Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman on the team, because it appears that Matt Ryan has kind of lost a step. Now, he's not necessarily lost a step so much to where it's hard to watch, but it's getting to the point where if he keeps playing for 2-3 years, that it's going to get to the point where it's like, wow, why are we watching Matt Ryan? This should be illegal. Quarterback 16 last week. I think he plays just fine up against the Les Titans. To close out the quarterbacks before we go to the tight ends, we've got Justin Bustin Fields himself. Let me read off his attempts. 11 attempts in week 2, 17 in week 1, 17 in week 3. How is that even possible? He's thrown 297 passing yards in 3 fucking games. 297 passing yards in 3 fucking games. That doesn't sound real, right? That sounds fake. That sounds like made up numbers. It's a wazzy, it's a woozy, like you're in Wolf of Wall Street, right? That makes absolutely no sense. Quarterback 23, 27, 31. He still has that rushing upside. That's why I have him ranked here. But again, once you get to this range, things start to get very bad. Like, once you're at Justin Fields, like, who's next? Jimmy Garoppolo, Jimmy Pornstar, Mitch Trubisky, Davis Mills, Brian Hoyer, Zach Wilson. You get into a very bad range once you get past quarterback 24. Now we move to the tight end position, headlined by Mr. Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the Buffalo Bills this week. Again, I've talked a lot this week about this matchup up against the Buffalo Bills. It is potentially going to be a little bit rainy in this game, but I still think Mark Andrews gets it done. Back-to-back weeks in week 2 and week number 3, he was the number 1 tight end in fantasy football, and I think he continues to keep the throne. He reigns on the throne as the number 1 tight end up against the Buffalo Bills. Again, I love this matchup for Mr. Mark Andrews. Next up, we move to Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And while I kind of just got down on my knees and gave a virtual gawk 9,000 to Mark Andrews, it's not like Travis Kelce is kicking the can down the road like he's some dog shit tight end. Tight end 1, 15 and 3.5 PPR over the last 3 games. Travis Kelce, obviously so, is still one of the best tight ends in fantasy football in the NFL, if not the best tight end in the NFL. 9, 7, and 8 targets in the last 3 games. Travis Kelce is always going to be reliable as a top 5 tight end. Sure, he'll have a down game every once in a while, but he's very consistent. At number 3, we have Darren Waller of the Las Vegas Raiders, going up against the Denver Broncos at home in Las Vegas. Tight end 9, 2 and 31 last week. They're yet again going to be without Hunter Renfrow, which is going to push my narrative more towards Darren Waller. Now, last week without Hunter Renfrow, we got the Mac Hollins experience. Mac Hollins went crazy like he was playing Madden on fucking rookie mode. I don't really expect that to happen again this week. I think he bounces back after last week's performance. 5 targets, 3 receptions, 22 receiving yards, 4 fantasy points, tight end 31. Again, I don't think that's the normal for Darren Waller. I really do like this matchup up against Denver, so I project a bounce back spot here. Number 4, Kyle Pitts. Round of applause. Everyone in the comments, leave a nice clap emoji for Kyle Pitts if you made it this far. man, oh man, things were starting to look grim. Things were starting to look bad for Kyle Pitts, tight end 36-29. Last week, he bounces back. He has a great first half. The second half, he was just sleeping on the fucking bench or something. He didn't get like any points. But hey, that bounce back spot was great for him up against Cleveland. I expect him to continue to be a key piece in this Atlanta Falcons offense. Next up, we got George Kittle me Timbers of the San Francisco 49ers going up against the LA Rams at home in San Francisco. We all know that Jimmy Garoppolo has this strange love affection for George Kittle. I know in Kittle's bounce-back game last week, or his comeback game up against Denver, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 28 yards, 5 fantasy points, tight end 23 doesn't look the best. I know he's playing up against the Rams, but you want to rely on George Kittle going forward, and I don't really think you should be sitting him. At tight end number 6, we got TJ Hawkinson, who was dealing with some injuries early on in the week, but based upon what I have read, again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not saying he's a lock to play, but based upon what I have read, I personally believe that he is going to play on Sunday up against Seattle. Now, they're going to be without Mr. Amon-Ra St. Brown, so I think that gives even more positive signs as to why you might want to rank TJ Hawkinson very high this week. He hasn't really lived up to his expectations, finishing outside the top 12 twice and inside the top 12 only once. Obviously, that makes sense. 3 games, you're probably going to figure that out yourself. Last week up against the Minnesota Vikings, he scores a touchdown, but only goes 4 of 3 for 18 yards. Again, here up against Seattle, I think he has a much bigger game. At number 7, we have Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles, who has been the definition of consistency thus far this season. Tight end 13, 7, and 9 in his last 3 games. This Philadelphia Eagles offense looks amazing. Chef's kiss, magnifique, and I think going forward, you want to be relying on Dallas Goedert. He doesn't really have that upside to be the number 1 tight end in any single week because of how good the wide receivers are around him with Devontae Smith and with A.J. Brown, but I still think he's a guy you need to consider to put inside your top 8 of your rankings. Closing out the top 8, we have Dallas Goedert's former teammate, Zach Ertz of the Arizona Cardinals, going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina this week. 3 weeks in a row putting up solid numbers. Tight end 7 in week 1, tight end 5 in week number 2, and tight end 15 last week. This Arizona Cardinals offense has not been what I thought they would be early on in the season, but they're still decent. And again, this matchup up against Carolina is good. So Zach Ertz, tight end number 8. We're still in the range of tight ends that I like, but eventually, after tight end number 11, things start to get very wishy-washy for me. Tyler Higbee of the LA Rams going up against the 49ers. Now, last week was one of his better performances, but he saw a dip in targets. 11 targets week 1, 9 targets in week 2, just 4 in week number 3. But again, I understand Stafford hasn't looked the best. And I'm not just going to pull the wool over your eyes and tell you that, oh, he's been great, right? He hasn't been. He has not been, but he keeps targeting Higbee and Cooper Kupp, so I think you can still continue to rely on Higbee. Tight end number 10, Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Jumbo Jets. Tight end 8, 10, and 21 in the last 3 games. Pat Freiermuth has been incredibly reliable, and I think he will continue to be reliable even when Kissin Titties Mitchell Trubisky ends up getting benched for the small hands guy, Kenny Pickett. I do like Pat Freiermuth here up against the Jets. This matchup is definitely pretty solid for him, and it seems as though Mitch Trubisky likes to throw him the ball. Tight end number 11, we got Gerald Everett of the LA Chargers without Keenan Allen yet again. I think you want to just go ahead and roll out Gerald Everett. Now, obviously, his downside is that he's not the main target on the team, and that Justin Herbert, the pervert, obviously is banged up. But the positive is that when this offense is clicking at all cylinders, they could score 5 fucking touchdowns against the Texans, and Gerald Everett could score 2. So you definitely want to start him this week. Now is when we get into the demise at the tight end position. Dawson Knox, one time, if you are with me, Bills tight end Dawson Knox, back/hip was limited in practice this week and is officially questionable for Sunday's game against the Ravens, according to Mike Garafolo. So, Dawson Knox hasn't been great. Tight end 50, 18, 28. Again, I love this matchup up against Baltimore, but at some point, the pain becomes too much with Dawson Knox, and I have to tell you guys to start sitting him. That's not the time yet, but we're getting very close to it. Tight end number 13, David Njoku, who had an amazing game in week number 3. 10 targets, 9 receptions, 89 yards, and a tug. 19 fantasy points, tight end number 2. Again, I think that was a bit of an anomaly, but could he have a decent game here up against Atlanta? Definitely. So I think just discrediting him for having a great game would be mean, especially since he gets the Falcons this week. So tight end 13 I thought was fair. Number 14, we got Tyler Conklin of the Jumbo Jets going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Top 18 performances every single week of the season, tight end 11, 16, and 5. This guy has been a target monster for Joe Flacco and the Jets, but now it is no longer Joe Flacco, Joe Cool and the Jets. It's now MILF Hunter, Zach Wilson, and the Jets. And maybe, and I think this seems more realistic, that Zach Wilson doesn't dump the ball off as much to Tyler Conklin. So again, am I panicking? Am I cutting him? No, but I'm definitely nowhere near as confident as I would be if Flacco was under center. Number 15, we got Irv Smith Jr. of the Minnesota Vikings going up against the New Orleans Saints, back-to-back weeks with over 6 targets. The question is, will Kirk Cousins, primetime Kirk Cousins, show up, or will normal Kirk Cousins show up? I think Irv Smith is an immensely talented player. There are a lot of cooks to feed in this Minnesota Vikings kitchen, which is why he's tight end 15. Number 16, we got Easy E, Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars going up against the Philadelphia Eagles this week in Philadelphia. Last week, he scores a 2-point conversion to save the day, but he had his lowest target total on the year. Evan Ingram actually looks the best I think I've seen Evan Ingram look in his career this year. He hasn't been dropping the ball. He's been catching the ball when it's thrown to him by Trevor Lawrence. Does that mean that he's never going to drop a ball again? Of course not, but I do like what I've seen out of him. This matchup is not the best, but it could be a higher scoring game. So Easy E, tight end 16. Now onto tight end 17 through 24. We began with Logan Thomas, who looked pretty good to start the year. Last week kind of shit the bed, but again, that whole Washington Commanders team looked off last week because of Carson Wentz's play. Up against Dallas, I don't really see a smash spot, but I do think he could be decent. This range of tight ends, it is really just like throwing shit up against the wall. Tight end number 18, we've got Robert Tonyan of the Packers going up against the New England Deflatriots. His best game yet this season came in week 3 up against the Bucs. 7 targets, 6 receptions, 37 receiving yards, 7 fantasy points, tight end number 16. He gets the Patriots this week. Again, this matchup might just be a shit kicking of the century where they just run the ball with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon a bunch of times. I think Robert Tonyan is fine, but again, not one of those ideal players. Next up, we got Juwan Johnson of the New Orleans Saints going up against the Minnesota Vikings. The first 2 weeks this season, he looked good. Last week, he only saw 1 target. I think we're to see a lot of Taysom Hill in this game, which has me worried about Juwan Johnson. Now, if you can play Taysom Hill in the tight end spot this week and you don't have a great tight end, I'm YOLOing and playing Taysom Hill because I think there's a chance that Taysom Hill ends up being the starting quarterback of the team for a lot of plays and having a crazy game. Again, I'm not telling you that that's a lock, but I think that could happen. Juwan Johnson is just meh. Tight end 20. Next up, we move to Albert O of the Denver Broncos going up against the Raiders. It seems like the Broncos want to use a tight end, but they don't necessarily want to use Albert O. Could he have a big game? Yes, but I don't expect much. Again, these tight ends are just dead. I'm just going to speed through them. Fast as fuck, Lightning McQueen style. Hunter Henry. 3 targets, 1 target, 1 target. Maybe Brian Hoyer is such a garbage can that he just dumps the ball off to Henry a bunch of times. That's really my only expectation here on why Henry might be useful. After Henry, we move to Cameron Brate. There's been a decent amount of injuries to the Bucs. Maybe some of the guys end up missing, but even with the missing players, it's not like Brate has top 10 potential. Was tight end 14 last week with all those injuries. Could do worse than him. Tight end 23, Noah Fant of the Seattle Seahawks. Seems like they want to use a lot of tight ends in Seattle. 4 for 4, like he was at Wendy's last week against the Falcons. 27 receiving yards, 5 fantasy points, tight end number 24. Maybe he unleashes up against the Lions, but I don't really expect that. Tight end 24, Cole Kmet finally sees more than like 1 target. 1 target, 3 targets last week. Amazing. Maybe, just maybe, Justin Fields magically starts uncorking the ball this week against the Giants, but I don't really see that coming. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hitting that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at notorious FNTSY. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, good boy!